In a place beyond stars and time, beings older than the universe itself gathered to watch. They had no bodies like humans did. They were made of light and thought and something that mortal minds could never understand. They called themselves the Eternal Council, and they had existed since before the first star burned in the darkness. For billions of years they had watched. They watched galaxies form and die. They watched life grow on countless worlds. They watched civilizations build great empires and then fall to dust. They never helped. They never stopped anything. They only watched. This was their one law: observe but never interfere. Today they watched a war. The Empire had attacked the Galactic Coalition. They were terrible creatures. They stood 8 feet tall with 6 arms and bodies covered in armor harder than any metal. Their eyes glowed red with hunger for conquest. In the last 1,000 years, they had destroyed 47 species. Entire worlds burned because of them. Billions of beings had died or become slaves. The Galactic Coalition was different. It was an alliance of peaceful species, traders, scientists, artists, and dreamers. They had no great weapons. They had no warriors. They had only hope, and hope was not enough against the eldest of the Eternal Council watched the first battles. Coalition ships exploded like flowers of fire in the darkness of space. Millions died in the first week alone. "It will end soon," said one of the younger observers. "The Coalition will fall. They will continue their conquest. This is how it has always been." The eldest said nothing. It had seen this pattern 1,000,000 times before. The strong destroyed the weak. The cruel defeated the kind. This was the way of the universe. But then something happened that made all of them turn their attention to a small, blue planet in an ordinary galaxy. Earth. The humans had received the Coalition's call for help, a desperate message sent to every corner of the galaxy. Most species ignored it. Some laughed at it. What could anyone do against the humans did not ignore it. In the Great Hall of the United Earth Government, leaders from every nation gathered. On the massive screen before them, the Coalition's message played. Images of burning worlds, recordings of attacks, the screams of the dying. Captain stood at the center of the hall. He was 42 years old with gray starting to show in his black hair. His uniform was simple, without medals or decorations. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years, but he had never faced anything like this. "They are asking for our help," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The Coalition. They are asking every species in the galaxy to stand with them against the hall erupted in argument. "This is not our war," shouted a representative from the European Federation. "We have never even met these aliens. Why should our children die for strangers?" "They are on the other side of the galaxy," added another. "They will never reach Earth. We should stay quiet and hope they forget we exist." Admiral stepped forward. She was only 36, the youngest admiral in human history. Her record was perfect. Every battle she commanded, she won. But more than her victories, people remembered her eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and refused to look away. "If we hide," she said, "they will not forget us. They will simply come for us last, after they have destroyed everyone else, after there is no one left to help us." The arguments continued for hours. Some said humanity was too weak. Some said it was not their problem. Some said the cost would be too great. Then stood up. She was Earth's diplomatic envoy, a woman of 50 with a soft voice and gentle manner. She had spent her life building bridges between nations, ending conflicts with words instead of weapons. Everyone respected her, even those who disagreed with her. "I have listened to all of you," she said. "I understand your fears. This war is far away. These species are strangers to us. We have our own problems, our own struggles, our own dreams for the future." She paused and looked around the room. "But I remember something my grandmother told me when I was a child. She said that the measure of a person is not how they treat their friends. It is how they treat strangers who need help." The room grew quiet. "The coalition is asking for help," continued. "Millions of beings are dying. Children are being taken as slaves. Entire cultures are being erased from existence. And we are asking ourselves if this is our problem." She shook her head slowly. "It is everyone's problem. Because if we let evil win simply because it is far away, then we have already lost something more important than any war. We have lost who we are." The vote happened that night. It passed by a single vote. Humanity would go to war. In the shipyards of Earth, construction began immediately. 50 warships were ready within 3 months. They were not the biggest ships or the fastest ships. They did not have the best weapons or the strongest shields, but they had something else. They had humans. Captain stood on the bridge of the flagship, the Unity. Through the window, he could see Earth growing smaller as the fleet moved toward the jump point. "Nervous?" Admiral asked, standing beside him. "Terrified," he admitted. "We are going to fight an enemy we have never seen, in a war we do not understand, far from home." "Then why did you volunteer?" "Thought about it for a moment. Because someone had to, and because I could not live with myself if I stayed behind while others fought and died." Nodded, she understood. Every human in the fleet understood. They were not fighting because they were brave. They were fighting because they could not imagine doing anything else. On the other side of the galaxy, the coalition received word that help was coming. Most of their leaders did not believe it. Humans, those primitive creatures from that tiny planet, what could they possibly do against the... But the coalition was desperate. They would accept any help, even from species they had never met. In their realm beyond reality, the Eternal Council watched the human fleet enter hyperspace. "Interesting," said the eldest observer. Its voice was like thunder and whispers at the same time. "The humans choose to fight." "They will die," said another observer. "They are too weak, too small, too young. That will destroy them in their first battle." "Perhaps," said the eldest, "but perhaps not. There is something different about these creatures, something I have not seen in a very long time." "What is that?" The eldest did not answer immediately. It watched the tiny human ships flying toward certain doom. It watched the soldiers inside those ships, holding photographs of loved ones, writing letters home, praying to gods they were not sure existed. "Hope," the eldest finally said. "Not the hope that comes from strength, not the hope that comes from knowing you will win, but the hope that comes from choosing to fight anyway, even when victory seems impossible." The other observers did not understand. They had watched the universe for eons. They had seen hope die 1,000,000,000 times. But the eldest remembered something from long ago, before it had become old and tired and cynical. It remembered what it felt like to believe in something greater than survival. It watched the human fleet disappear into hyperspace, and for the first time it felt something that might have been called curiosity. What would these strange little creatures do next? The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of territory. 50 ships hung in the darkness of space, their lights blinking against the endless black. Around them, the stars were different. These were not the familiar stars of home. These were alien suns in an alien sky, and somewhere out there, an enemy was waiting. Commander stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the fastest ship in the human fleet. She was 34 years old with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Before the war, she had been a test pilot, flying experimental ships that no one else dared to touch. Now she commanded 300 souls. "Status report," she said calmly. Lieutenant looked up from his console. He was young, only 25, but his mind was sharper than anyone had ever met. He could calculate trajectories in his head faster than computers. He could find patterns in chaos. He was also terrified, though he tried hard not to show it. 50 ships accounted for, he said. All systems operational. Long-range sensors detecting patrol ships approximately 4 hours away. How many? 12, Commander. Nodded. 12 ships against 50 human ships might seem like good odds, but everyone knew the truth. One ship was worth 10 human ships. Their technology was centuries ahead. Their weapons could cut through human shields like paper. Their armor could withstand almost anything humans could throw at them. "They will detect us soon," Admiral said through the communication channel. Her voice was steady but could hear the tension beneath it. "We need a plan." Stared at the tactical display. The patrol was moving in a standard formation. They were confident. Why would they not be? They had never lost a battle against anyone. "We cannot fight them directly," said. "We would lose." "Then what do you suggest?" Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. "We make them fight our way instead." The plan was simple and dangerous. Instead of meeting in open space, the human fleet retreated toward a nearby asteroid field. They followed, eager for easy kills. They did not understand why these strange new ships were running. It did not matter. Prey was prey. But the asteroid field changed everything. Ships were massive and powerful. They were designed for direct combat, for overwhelming force, for crushing enemies with superior firepower. They were not designed for navigating through tumbling rocks at high speed. Human ships were smaller, faster, more agile, and human pilots had spent their entire lives learning to adapt, to improvise, to survive against impossible odds. The first ship died when it chased a human destroyer into a narrow gap between two asteroids. The human ship slipped through easily. The ship was too large. It crashed and exploded in a ball of fire. The second ship died when it found itself surrounded by 3 human ships that appeared from behind asteroids. They attacked from multiple angles, targeting the same weak point in its shields. The commander had never faced tactics like this. By the time it tried to respond, it was already too late. By the end of the battle, 8 ships were destroyed. The remaining 4 retreated, damaged and confused. Human losses, 3 ships and 47 lives. It was not a victory without cost, but it was a victory. News spread across the galaxy. They could be beaten, not by superior technology, not by greater numbers, but by humans who refused to fight fair. On the coalition, leaders who had given up hope began to believe again. Ships that had been hiding came out of darkness. Species that had surrendered started to resist. And on a small transport ship, Private volunteered for the most dangerous mission anyone had ever attempted. She was 20 years old. She had joined the military 2 years ago, expecting to spend her service time repairing engines and running supplies. Instead, she found herself on the front lines of an interstellar war. "The mission is simple," Captain explained to the 12 volunteers. They sat in a cramped briefing room, their faces pale but determined. "We board a command ship. We steal their data cores. We get out." "How do we board their ship?" asked one of the soldiers. "We crash into it." Silence. "A small shuttle," continued, "moving fast enough to penetrate their hull before their shields can react. Once inside, we have approximately 15 minutes before they overwhelm us with numbers." 15 minutes, repeated quietly. 15 minutes to find the data cores, download everything, and reach the extraction point. Looked around at her fellow soldiers. She could see the fear in their eyes. She felt it in her own heart, but she also saw something else. Determination, anger, the refusal to give up. "I am in," she said. One by one, the others nodded. The boarding action happened 3 days later. The shuttle hit the command ship like a bullet, tearing through the hull and crashing into a cargo bay. Was the first one out, her rifle already firing. They were waiting for them. Dozens of warriors, each one twice her size, with claws that could cut through armor and eyes that burned with rage. What followed was 15 minutes of chaos. Did not remember most of it later. She remembered shooting. She remembered running. She remembered watching friends die and screaming their names. She remembered a warrior standing over her, ready to kill her, and somehow finding the strength to shoot it in the face. She remembered reaching the data core room with only 4 of her team still alive. She remembered downloading the files, while her remaining teammates held the door against an army. She remembered the extraction shuttle appearing like a miracle and strong hands pulling her aboard, and the cold darkness of space as they escaped. Of the 12 soldiers who went in, only 5 came out. But they had the data. And when the technicians analyzed what in her team had stolen, they found something that changed everything. Locations of slave camps, millions of coalition citizens, still alive, waiting to be rescued. Admiral made the decision immediately. Rescue operations began within hours. In the realm beyond reality, the observers watched in silence. "They are strange creatures," said one of them. "They throw away their lives for strangers." "They are wasteful," said another. "They could have achieved the same goals with less sacrifice." The eldest observer said nothing. It watched lying in a medical bed, covered in bandages, sleeping the deep sleep of the exhausted. It watched the rescued slaves crying with joy as human soldiers led them to safety. It watched captains saluting the empty chairs of the soldiers who did not return. "They are not wasteful," the eldest finally said. "They are something we have forgotten how to understand." "What is that?" "They are compassionate. They care about others more than they care about themselves. They feel the pain of strangers as if it were their own." The other observers did not understand. Compassion was inefficient. It led to unnecessary risk. It did not make logical sense. But the eldest understood something the others did not. Logic was not everything. Sometimes the heart knew things the mind could not grasp. And in that moment, watching the humans fight and die and rescue and hope, the eldest felt something it had not felt in a billion years. Admiration. 6 months had passed since humanity entered the war. In that time, the galaxy learned a new word, human. It meant something different to everyone who spoke it. To the coalition, human meant hope. It meant rescue ships appearing when all seemed lost. It meant soldiers who fought with impossible courage. It meant allies who kept their promises. To the human meant confusion. It meant enemies who did not fight the way enemies should fight. It meant defeats that should have been victories. It meant fear, though no one would ever admit to feeling such weakness. To the Eternal Council, human meant mystery. It meant a species that did not follow the patterns they had observed for billions of years. It meant questions without answers. On the mining world of IV, Sargent stood on a hill overlooking a slave camp. 3 million coalition citizens lived there, if you could call what they did living. They worked 18 hours a day, mining precious metals for the war machine. They ate barely enough to survive. They slept in crowded buildings with no heat and no hope. Had seen many terrible things in his 38 years of life. He had grown up poor in a small village. He had joined the military to escape poverty and found purpose instead. He had watched friends die in training accidents, in small conflicts, in the chaos of this war. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of those slave camps. "How many soldiers do we have?" he asked quietly. His corporal checked the numbers. 400, Sergeant. They have approximately 8,000 warriors guarding the camp. 20 to 1, impossible odds. Command says reinforcements are 3 days away, the corporal added. Looked at the camp again. He could see children through his binoculars. Small creatures with blue skin and big eyes, carrying loads that would have been heavy for an adult human. Some of them fell and did not get up again. "We cannot wait 3 days, he said. "Sergeant, that is suicide." "Perhaps, but those children cannot wait 3 days either." He turned to face his soldiers. 400 humans standing in the cold wind of an alien world far from everything they knew and loved. They looked tired. They looked scared. They looked at him with trust in their eyes. "I will not order anyone to follow me," said. "This mission is voluntary. If we attack now, many of us will die, maybe all of us. The odds are against us in every way that matters." He paused. "But in that camp, 3 million beings are counting on us. They do not know we are here. They do not know our names. They have never seen a human before. But they are praying for someone, anyone, to save them." He stood taller. "I am going to answer their prayers. Those who wish to join me, step forward." Every single soldier stepped forward. The battle for IV lasted 5 days, not 3. And his soldiers used every trick humanity had learned. They attacked at night when senses were weakest. They set traps and ambushes. They retreated and attacked again from different angles. They fought in buildings and tunnels, and anywhere else the size became a disadvantage. They lost 200 soldiers in those 5 days. 200 humans who would never see home again, who would never hold their families, who would never grow old. But they saved 3 million lives. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found standing at the gates of the slave camp, covered in blood and dust and tears. Behind him, the freed prisoners were helping the wounded, sharing food, singing songs of gratitude in languages humans had never heard before. "Sergeant," the reinforcement commander said, "you were supposed to wait." Looked at the children playing in the sunlight, free for the first time in their short lives. "They could not wait," he said simply, "so we did not wait either." Far away, on the medical frigate Mercy, Doctor made a discovery that would change everything. She was 45 years old, who had spent her career studying alien life forms. Before the war, she had dreamed of peaceful first contact, of learning from other species, of expanding humanity's understanding of the universe. Instead, she found herself examining dead warriors, trying to understand what made them so aggressive, so violent, so impossible to reason with. And in the genetic code of those warriors, she found something that should not have been there. Artificial modifications. Changes made to the genome millions of years ago. Modifications that increased aggression, reduced empathy, and made them into perfect weapons of conquest. Someone had someone had made them into monsters. Stared at her research data for a long time. Her hands were shaking. This changed everything. They were not evil by nature. They were victims of something or someone far more ancient and far more terrible. She contacted Admiral immediately. "You are certain?" asked, her face pale on the screen. "The evidence is clear," replied. "The genetic modifications are too precise to be natural evolution. Someone engineered the to be conquerors. Someone turned an entire species into weapons." "Who would do such a thing?" "I do not know, but whoever they are still out there, and they have been watching us this entire time." In their realm beyond reality, the Eternal Council felt something they had not felt in eons. Fear. Their oldest secret was close to being discovered. The truth about what the observers had done millions of years ago in the name of their eternal experiment. "This is dangerous," said one of the younger observers. "If the humans discover the truth, they will hate us. They will try to fight us." "They cannot fight us," said another. "We are beyond their understanding, beyond their reach." "Are we?" asked the eldest. Its voice was heavy with something that might have been guilt. "Are we truly beyond the reach of creatures who refuse to accept the impossible?" No one answered. Meanwhile, Captain did something no one had ever done before. He requested permission to travel to not with weapons, not with soldiers, with only himself and a message. Admiral refused at first. It was too dangerous. They would kill him on sight. But insisted. "We have new information," he said. "Doctor's research shows that they were created to be this way. They did not choose to be monsters. Someone made them into monsters." "And you think they will listen to this?" "I think they deserve the chance to hear it." Everyone deserves the chance to be more than what they were made to be. Against her better judgment, approved the mission. Traveled alone to the... His small ship was surrounded by hundreds of enemy vessels. He expected to die at any moment. But they did not fire. They were curious. No human had ever come to them willingly before. Stood before the high command, a small human surrounded by giants, and he spoke the truth. "You were not always warriors," he said. "Millions of years ago, before your recorded history, someone changed your species. They took away your choice. They made you into weapons for their own purposes." The commanders roared with anger. They called him a liar. They threatened to kill him in 1,000 different ways. But one commander, an old warrior with scars covering half its face, raised a hand for silence. "What proof do you offer?" it asked. Gave them doctors' research, all of it. Every piece of data, every conclusion, every question that still needed answers. And for the first time in recorded history, a commander hesitated. Because deep down, in a place they had never explored, every had always wondered why they felt such endless rage, why peace felt like weakness, why mercy felt like failure. What if it was not their nature? What if it was their chains? The war paused, not ended, but suspended in a moment of confusion and doubt that spread across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Doctors' research had changed everything. The discovery that they had been genetically modified by some unknown force millions of years ago spread through coalition networks within days. Scientists from 100 different species analyzed the data. They all reached the same conclusion. They were not born conquerors. They were made into conquerors. Something unprecedented was happening. The species that had destroyed 47 civilizations, that had conquered half the galaxy, that had never known peace or mercy, was asking questions for the first time. Why do we fight? Why do we conquer? Why does peace feel like weakness? Not all asked these questions. Many rejected the research as human lies. Many continued to believe that conquest was their destiny, their purpose, their right. But some hesitated. Some wondered. Some looked at the endless cycle of war and death and asked if there could be another way. Rebel factions emerged, who wanted answers, who wanted change. The empire that had seemed invincible began to crack from within. On the human flagship Unity, Lieutenant worked day and night, analyzing the ancient archives that and her team had stolen during their boarding action. Most of the data was military information. Fleet positions, weapon specifications, communication codes. Useful but not surprising. But buried in the oldest files, in a section that had not been accessed in millions of years, found something else. References to beings called the Makers. "Commander," he said, his voice shaking as he called to his station, "you need to see this." The ancient records told a story that no living remembered. Millions of years ago, before the conquest, before the empire, they had been different. They had been peaceful. They had been artists and philosophers and dreamers. Then the Makers came. The records described them as beings of light and thought, entities that existed beyond normal space and time. They had appeared to the ancient and offered them a gift: power, strength, the ability to conquer the stars. But the gift was a curse. The Makers had changed at the genetic level. They had removed their capacity for peace. They had amplified their aggression. They had turned an entire species into weapons. And then they had disappeared, leaving them to wage war across the galaxy for millions of years. "They are real," whispered as she read the records. "Gods, actual gods." "Not gods," corrected quietly. "Something else. Something that has been watching us this entire time." The Eternal Council, the observers, the beings who had watched the universe for billions of years, never interfering, always observing. Except they had interfered. They had created as an experiment, a test to see how civilizations would respond to existential threat, a game that had cost trillions of lives. When Admiral received this information, she did not react immediately. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at nothing, processing the implications. Beings powerful enough to modify entire species. Beings old enough to remember the birth of stars. Beings who had treated intelligent life as nothing more than pieces on a game board. And humans had gotten their attention. "What do we do?" Captain asked. He had returned from the exhausted but alive. His mission had planted seeds of doubt among the enemy. Now they needed to figure out what those seeds would grow into. "We continue," said finally. "We fight the who still want to fight. We ally with the who want peace. And we find these makers, these observers, whatever they call themselves." "And then what?" His eyes were hard. "And then we have a conversation with them." The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. The eldest observer descended into mortal space. It appeared above the human fleet as a figure of impossible geometry, light that bent in wrong directions, shapes that human eyes could not fully see, a presence that pressed against the mind like the weight of an ocean. Every human who saw it felt terror. This was a being beyond their understanding, beyond their technology, beyond anything they had ever imagined. It could destroy them all with a thought. But Commander did not run. She stood on the bridge of the Defiance, looking at the impossible thing before her, and she refused to be afraid. "You were never meant to be here," the observer said. Its voice was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was inside their heads and outside their ships and woven into the fabric of space itself. Humanity was an accident, an experiment that exceeded parameters. "An experiment," kept her voice steady with effort. "Is that what we are to you, just another experiment?" "All life is our experiment. We seeded the first cells on 1 billion worlds. We watched them grow. We tested them. The strong survived. The weak perished. This is the way of the universe." "And the demanded. Was that a test too, turning an entire species into monsters just to see what would happen?" The observer's form flickered. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed uncertain. "They were a tool," it admitted. "A challenge for other civilizations to overcome. We wanted to observe how different species would respond to existential threat. Some fought, some surrendered, some transcended. All provided valuable data." "Valuable data," Private stepped forward. She was still recovering from her wounds, still walking with a limp, but her voice was strong. "Trillions of beings have died. Entire civilizations have been erased. Children have been enslaved and murdered. And you call that data?" The observer turned its attention to her. This small human, and tired and absolutely unafraid. "You are the one who led the boarding action," it said. "You risked your life to save strangers. Why?" "Because they needed help." "That is not a logical answer. You gained nothing from that action except injury and trauma." Shook her head. "You really do not understand, do you? We did not do it for gain. We did it because it was right, because we could not live with ourselves if we did nothing, because that is what it means to be human." The observer was silent for a long moment. "We have watched for billions of years," it finally said. "We have seen species driven by survival, by power, by fear, by logic. But we have rarely seen species driven by what you call compassion, by the willingness to suffer for strangers." "Then you have not been watching closely enough," Captain said, stepping forward to stand beside. "Or perhaps you have forgotten what it means to care about something other than yourself." The observer's form shifted again. Was that shame? Regret? Humans could not read the emotions of a being that had existed before emotions were invented. "We expected you to fail," the observer admitted, "or to become like the cold, logical, efficient. That is what usually happens when species face impossible odds. They lose what makes them weak." "Compassion is not weakness," said firmly. "It is our greatest strength. It is why we came to this war. It is why we will win." "You cannot win against us. We are beyond your understanding. Maybe, but we will try anyway, and you will watch like you always do. And maybe, just maybe, you will learn something." The observer said nothing for a long time. It hovered in space, ancient and vast and utterly still. And then, for the first time in its billion-year existence, it made a decision. "Show me," it said, "show me what humans can do." The final battle was not fought with weapons. Admiral proposed something that had never been attempted in the history of the galaxy, a joint operation between humans and, not to destroy the observers, that was impossible, but to confront them, to demand answers, to force them to face what they had done. "They have watched for billions of years," explained to the combined fleet commanders. Human admirals stood beside generals, former enemies united by a common purpose. They created thee as weapons. They seeded life across the galaxy just to watch it struggle and die. They treated us all as entertainment. "And now?" asked the old commander with scars on its face. Its name was, and it had been the first to question its own nature after hearing Captain's message. "What do you propose we do?" "We give them a choice," said. "The same choice they never gave the same choice they never gave any of us. The choice to be something different, something better." The fleet gathered at the edge of known space, where the barrier between mortal reality and the observer's realm grew thin. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, coalition vessels that had been hiding in fear, human warships that had traveled across the galaxy, dreadnoughts that had once been instruments of destruction. They came together not as conquerors, but as witnesses. Sergeant commanded the ground forces aboard the flagship. His unit had grown since IV. Veterans from a dozen battles, humans and aliens fighting side by side. They were not here to fight. They were here to stand. Doctor coordinated the scientific teams, analyzing the boundary between dimensions, searching for a way to communicate across the impossible gap between mortal space and whatever lay beyond. Commander led the fleet formation, her ships arranged not for battle but for unity. Every vessel was visible, every species represented. And Captain spoke for them all. He stood on the bridge of the Unity, surrounded by the leaders of a dozen civilizations, facing the endless darkness of the boundary zone. Somewhere out there, the observers watched. They were always watching. "Can they hear us?" asked. "They hear everything," Doctor replied. "They have been listening since before language existed." Nodded, he stepped forward, toward the that showed nothing but stars and darkness, and he began to speak. "You have watched for eons," he said, his voice calm and steady, broadcast across every frequency, into every corner of space and beyond. "You have created and destroyed. You have tested us like specimens in a laboratory. You have treated the pain of trillions as nothing more than interesting data." He paused, letting his words reach across the void. "We are not your experiments anymore." The darkness shifted. The observers were listening. "We are offering you something you have never had," continued. "A choice. You can continue watching from your realm beyond reality, alone and untouched, until the last star dies and the universe grows cold. You can keep your distance and your silence and your terrible games." He straightened his spine. "Or you can join us, not as gods but as equals, not as watchers but as participants. You can learn what you have forgotten, what it means to care, what it means to belong, what it means to be alive." Silence. "We cannot force you," admitted. "We cannot even truly understand you, but we know this: watching is not living, observing is not existing. You have spent billions of years as spectators to a universe full of wonder and pain and joy and loss, and in all that time you have never truly been part of any of it." He looked out at the fleet behind him. Humans and coalition species and former enemies, all of them waiting, all of them hopping. "We offer you something better," he said. "We offer you connection, community, purpose beyond observation. It will be difficult. It will be strange. You will make mistakes and feel pain and question everything you thought you knew. He smiled. But that is what it means to be alive. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. The fleet waited. The galaxy held its breath. And then the eldest observer appeared. It was different this time. Less impossibly vast. More almost, not quite, approaching something that might be called human. It hovered before the fleet like a star made of thought, ancient beyond understanding but somehow also young, as if seeing the universe for the first time. In all our existence, it said, and its voice was softer now, less overwhelming, no species has ever demanded our participation. They us or feared us or ignored us. They never asked us to join them. Then perhaps you were waiting for the right invitation, said. The observer turned to face the ships, stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, surrounded by warriors who had spent their entire lives in conquest, now standing beside creatures they had once hunted. We made you into weapons, the observer said to them. We took away your choice. For millions of years you have suffered because of what we did. Was silent for a long moment. Every in the fleet listened, waiting for their leader's response. We have done terrible things, finally said. We have destroyed civilizations, we have murdered children, we have spread suffering across the galaxy, and we blamed ourselves. We believed it was our nature, our destiny. He stepped forward. Now we know the truth. You made us into monsters, and we hate you for it. We will always hate you for it. The observer's form dimmed with something like sorrow. But continued, we have also learned something from these strange humans, something they call forgiveness. It does not erase the past. It does not make the pain go away, but it allows us to move forward, to become something other than what we were made to be. He extended a clawed hand toward the observer. If they can forgive us for what we did, perhaps we can forgive you. Perhaps we can all start again. The observer looked at the offered hand, at the fleet of former enemies standing together, at the humans who had challenged gods and refused to back down. And then it laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just understood a joke that had been waiting billions of years to be told. You are remarkable creatures, it said, all of you. Perhaps we have been watching long enough. It turned to face its fellow observers, who had gathered in the darkness like stars made of thought. What say you? It asked them. Shall we continue our eternal observation, or shall we finally step into the light? One by one, the observers descended into mortal space. The Treaty of Eternal Presence was signed 1 year later on Earth, in a garden in Seoul where cherry blossoms fell like pink snow. Now Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community read the terms aloud. The observers, now called the Elders, would participate in galactic affairs as advisors and teachers. They would use their vast knowledge to heal the damage they had caused. They would help undo the genetic modifications that had enslaved them for millions of years. And in return, the mortal species would teach them what they had forgotten: how to feel, how to hope, how to be part of something greater than themselves. Private sat in the back of the assembly hall, her uniform decorated with medals she never wore. Beside her sat the general who had once commanded armies of conquest. They did not speak the same language. They had no translator, but they understood each other perfectly. They had both been made into weapons. They had both chosen to be something else. Outside the hall, the sky was full of ships. Human vessels and coalition freighters and dreadnoughts and strange, beautiful craft that seemed to be made of light and thought. They circled the planet in a dance of celebration, leaving trails of color against the stars. Commander stood on the observation deck of the Defiance, watching the display. Lieutenant stood beside her, his for once put away. Did you ever imagine it would end like this? He asked. Shook her head. I never imagined it would end at all. I thought we would fight and die and be forgotten. Another species ground to dust by the war machine. What changed? Thought about it for a long moment. We did, or maybe we just showed the galaxy who we were all along, stubborn, compassionate, too stupid to know when we were beaten. Smiled, that sounds like humans. Yes, agreed, it does. In the garden below, Admiral found Captain sitting alone on a bench, watching the cherry blossoms fall. His hair was grayer now. His face had more lines, but his eyes were peaceful. You should be inside, she said. They are going to want you to give a speech. I have given enough speeches, he replied. Let someone else talk for a while. Sat down beside him. For a moment, they just watched the blossoms fall in silence. We did it, she finally said. We actually did it. We did something, agreed. Whether it was the right thing, I suppose we will find out. Do you have doubts? Picked up a fallen blossom and studied it. Such a small thing, so delicate, so temporary. I have questions, he said. I always have questions, but I also have hope, and I think that is enough. He looked up at the sky, where the ships of 100 species danced among the stars. The gods no longer watch in silence, he said quietly. They watch and they wonder, and for the first time they hope. Is that enough? Smiled. It is a beginning, and beginnings are always enough. Above them the cherry blossoms continued to fall, and in the vast darkness of space the elders watched, not as observers but as participants, not as gods but as friends. The war was over. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in the history of the universe, everyone was facing it together. And that made all the difference.